I'll just mention that David is a, I guess you'd say professional researcher. Is that how you describe yourself? Distinguished researcher.
That seems fair. No, well, that's what they say, but professional sounds better. Distinguished is a bit much.
At a think tank called Rethink Priorities, which is, quote, dedicated to figuring out the best ways to make the world a better place, unquote. So good fit with the conference themes here. He's going to be talking to us about effective altruism and how to conduct research on it, what are some opportunities within it. And he has a long history of research in this domain in terms of coming at it from an economist perspective, understanding charitable giving and other related topics. And yeah, I'll just let him take it away from there.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay and see me decently? Let me put on my fancy phone. Okay. Can you still hear me even with the fancy microphone? I hope so. Okay, just turn on settings. All right, so there's a lot of things I want to cover, and I won't be able to cover them all, and I will be posting my slides once I get them all sorted out. So thanks a lot for inviting me. It's a really interesting conference. I think my presentation is probably going to be very different than the previous presentation, but the organizations, the research organizations I'm talking about, do get at some of the issues that were discussed about what is the value of life, how to lead a good life, how to define value. So let me just begin with the message I want you to take away from this presentation. So we might all be familiar with this quote from John Maynard Keynes. Practical men who believe themselves to be exempt from intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist. So I think we can do better than this, actually. I think we don't just have to sort of vainly hope. I think now, actually, research is influencing a lot of funding and decisions. So the founders of Effective Altruism actually took ideas from philosophy, economics, and other parts of academia to build a rigorous approach to doing the most good in the world and to exploring and measuring this. And I would say that it's an extremely analytical and high-minded and idealistic pursuit, but yet miraculously effective altruism has a passionate and influential group of supporters and a substantial pool of funds for research, interventions, and advocacy. I think it's actually a big opportunity for academic researchers, which I think most of you are. EA, Effective Altruism and Global Priorities Research, offers a huge opportunity for academic researchers to have a positive impact on the allocation of a lot of funds, as well as on the market for ideas. There are opportunities to fundings to support your research within academia, to promote the impact of your research, to gain valuable feedback, and to help students find meaningful careers in research. And you may want to leave academia to work directly for an EA-aligned organization like I did, and hopefully I'll have time to get to why you might want to do that. So now, what am I not going to cover in this presentation? Well, I'm not going to cover what I'm not going to cover because there's no time to cover that. So who is and what is effective altruism? Who is involved with it? I'm not sure how well aware you are. We tend to think that people are misinformed, but you might be amongst the very well informed. So I would say that the easiest definition is just doing the most good. Effective altruism is the idea of doing the most good given limited resources. And there's some relationship to utilitarianism, but which we could debate, and is debated what sort of utilitarianism we're talking about. But a major question is, how is it that we define the most good? And some of what I will talk about will get at that, and that's a major part of the enterprise and academics' role in it. Okay, so I want to ask you a question. The question is, what do you think that effective altruists prioritize most? Do you think it's animal welfare? Do you think it's global poverty? Or do you think that it's long-termism? And here are some questions, from a survey that we asked about this. So here are your choices: global poverty, artificial intelligence risk, climate change, cause prioritization, or animal welfare. So this is a quiz. So I'd like you to answer to make a guess in the chat window: 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. I will look at those answers later and see how well we did. Maybe not in real time though. Sorry, some skipping here. So please enter your answer in the chat window: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. What do you think that effective altruists prioritize the most, at least in recent years? Global priority, AI risk, climate change, cause prioritization, or animal welfare. And now that you've answered, well, here's what in our survey, people who identify with the effective altruism movement and volunteered to respond said that they prioritize the most. And it was, in fact, global poverty, although artificial intelligence risk came a pretty close second. Long-termism is somewhere down or in the middle. However, when we look at the people who claim that they are most highly engaged, and also when we ask people at the sort of head of this movement, they prioritize artificial intelligence risk and prioritization itself. Global priorities research into what the priorities should be. And they think that these things should demand the most resources. And actually, global poverty, which maybe was at the core of effective altruism before and is still very important to EA, gets somewhere down on the ranking. Okay. The next question you might have, and sorry, I meant to monitor the chat window with my other device, but my other device ran out of power, so there goes that idea. How much effective altruism funding is there out there? Do you think there's 1 million, 100 million, 1 billion? And to be honest, I don't have the best answer to this question, but I did my best digging to give you a sense of it. So the largest funder is called Open Philanthropy. It's a group of individuals who have founded this organization, which largely aligns with the priorities of effective altruism, and they fund both direct intervention as well as research. And I did a bit of a, you can look in, when I share it, you can look into the actual stats that I gathered and the data processing. You can see how I gathered this. Basically, I looked at all of their grants, which they make this public, their grant making, and I filtered it on a few search terms that seem to include things that would likely or certainly be research funding. Their funding has been somewhere in the 70 million range per year in recent years. And there's other funders too, and other organizations getting funding. Sorry for the code stuck in there. What is being funded? Well, these are the areas that they're funding. So a lot of it is just raw. Sorry, some of the graphs here are maybe a little small. Is basic scientific research, or not basic, actually applied scientific research, biosecurity, AI risk, artificial intelligence risk and alignment, global catastrophe risk. It's quite a mixed bag. There's a criminal justice reform group that's gotten quite a bit of funding. And what are some top organizations in terms of the grants received? It's been organizations, some have been universities, some have been AI organizations and fellowships. Machine Intelligence Research Institute is a big one, but they've also given a certain amount of funding to Rethink Priorities, Global Priorities Institute, and others. So what other organizations are doing this research or interested in doing this research? One of which is Longview. There's some others, and sorry, my slides are missing here, but Rethink Priorities is a large one. Global Priorities Institute is a large one. Future of Humanity Institute is an organization based in Oxford, is a very large one. And these each have, let's say, dozens of researchers and research affiliated people at their centers. Sorry, I meant to show a different slide here. Okay, so how much funding is there in the space? Well, we did some estimates about how much there is per year. We tend to estimate things through tools like Guesstimate with these margins of error. So for instance, this is the amount of wealth that's deployable. That's not the same, obviously, as spending per year. Okay. Apologize for the missing slides there. How do most effective altruists engage? Who are these people? What is most strongly advocated? Would it be political action? So this is survey 2, if you want to put in your answers, and I'll take a look and see what people put in. Just type it in the chat window if you don't mind. I'd rather have done an anonymous survey, but there's not a lot of time sometimes to set these things up. So do EAs and EA organizations advocate political action, earning to give and effective charitable donations, pursuing a high impact career, or avoiding environmental damage, I don't know why I did that, through personal actions? 1, political action. 2, effective giving and earning to give. 3, pursuing a high impact career. Or 4, avoiding environmental damage through personal actions. So I would say that the most strongly advocated thing is, I would suggest that these days pursuing a high impact career is most highly advocated by EA organizations. Although earning to give is still advocated to some extent. You might be familiar with the giving what we can pledge, being somewhat at the core of EA. And political action, at least voting, is becoming seen as more important. The 4th, avoiding environmental damage through personal actions, probably goes in opposition to the, as a priority, goes to the, of course, we care a lot about the environment, but probably goes into the opposition to the sort of utilitarian consequentialist view, rather than the idea of avoiding sin. So effective altruism is very much about maximizing the good you do, perhaps with some constraints, so there might be some deontological constraints, but it's not primarily focused on avoiding quote unquote sin. We had tried to avoid I would say the action inaction bias. There is bias towards inaction. In other words, thinking it's worse to do harm than to do good, in a sense that I could pose more eloquently than I am right now. So since 2015, 80,000 hours thinks that only a small portion of people should be earning to give. There's some support for political influence, and in fact, we see this in the paths of EAs. This is again from the EA survey, where in fact only, let's say, a plurality but a minority are expecting to do a for-profit path earning to give. This is from the EA survey. Large groups are working or hoping to work at EA organizations, or making a difference via academia, perhaps, etc. Okay, and particularly among the highest engaged, earning to give is somewhat less popular. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about my story. And why am I telling you about my story? Not just self-aggrandizement, I hope. I'm telling you because I hope it might help you understand the limitations of academia and working at an EA organization, if your goal is to have a lot of impact, or maybe if your goals are somewhat similar to my goals in certain ways. All right, so here's my good old CV in its current state, and I try to tell a story on my CV. Well, first of all, this is what my research interests were and are to some extent, and here I try to tell the story. I left academia, a secure tenured post, to pursue impact as a researcher at Rethink Priorities. I also have a grant from Longview Philanthropy, which is allowing me to continue much of my prior and continuing research agenda into what motivates people to give, what motivates people to give effectively, how do people process effectiveness information in their giving, and other related things involving charitable giving, life choices, social outcomes. So here's a little bit of my story. I did my PhD at Berkeley, and while I was at Berkeley, I was very interested in proposing new ideas that were motivated, that were influenced by what I learned in economics, such as the idea that there might be an advantage to the government allowing companies to profitably charge less to people who earn less, which I thought had large welfare potential for large welfare gains. But I found it was very hard to find an audience for this. And in academia, you're very much advised to pursue things where you can show off in some way, where you can show a connection to the previous literature. How does it inform the standard economic models of optimization? Will this publish well? And where we did care about impact or influence, it was always, how does this inform government policy? Not how does it inform the behavior of altruists, or how people might think they should behave. And some other of my work involved, I did a paper on should rational altruists, this was before I'd heard about effective altruism, so I could think about proto-effective altruist, should rational altruists be buying products such as fair trade coffee, sort of bundling their other regard with their consumption? Is there any gain to be had there, or should they separate the two? But again, who does this inform? I had to come up with policy implications for it, for government typically, or for the economic model. Another branch of research on, does one contribution come at the expense of another? Yes, there's implications for government and for charities, but there's also implications for people doing fundraising and doing good, to think about, am I robbing Peter to pay Paul? I tried to line up my work, particularly in applying for jobs and things, to sort of nest it in these different fields, but it didn't always nest in these different fields. This was my sort of Venn diagram of research. So then I moved to Exeter, started my sort of academic research career. Sorry, there's some slides missing. First, I worked at Essex, pursuing a standard research agenda, also pursuing these impact ideas. Then I moved to Exeter. I was able to pursue impact with an ESRC grant. At least that was the idea, an REF-focused ESRC grant. I tried building some resources like innovations in fundraising. Oh, sorry, I somehow am not online. I hope I am online generally. And barriers to effective giving. But it's hard to nest these resources in the standard academic agenda. It's hard to sort of get the credit for them that's due. And to the extent that REF rewards impact, it's to some extent a box ticking exercise. So what's good about working in academia? Support, research freedom, you have the time to do deep theoretical work. What are some limitations? Well, politics, management, you play a lot of games involving journals, and you're teaching students who are not always caring about the material itself. They're sometimes, interested, as we know, in getting a degree and getting a good job. Sorry for the pun. I then rethought my priorities and left my secure academic post to work at Rethink Priorities. What am I doing at Rethink Priorities? Well, continuing to the barriers to effective giving research funded by Longview. It's a meta-analysis project. It's a field experiments project. It's a categorization project. You can look at the barriers to effective giving link, which I'll try to share. I'm working on the EA survey and movement building. I'm doing some interesting work involving data science, involving some of the same issues in survey design and survey analysis that but for this applied question of how is the effective altruism movement going to be built over time and what impact will it have? And I'm also doing work on outreach and message testing, which links with my previous agenda on what can get people to care about the things that effective altruism thinks they should care about. And then I'm going to be working with other areas, with other parts of Rethink Priorities on things like modeling the meat industry, or moral weights, or measures of satisfaction. Okay. So, and I have tried to bring some connection with academia. I think we can do things outside of academia that connects to what academia used to do and connects with students. All right, you can think of a map of what effective altruism and global priorities does and what they look like and who's in this space. I'll try to give you a little picture of that. What are the important cause areas? Well, there's what we call near-termism, which is maybe what we traditionally think of when we talk about effective altruism. There's long-termism, which focuses a lot on existential risk, as well as S-risk, and thinking a lot about the long-term future and the vast potential of the long-term future. Should we be thinking more about the long-term than about the present, and how do we trade this off? Then there's a large component, especially Rethink Priorities, focused on animal welfare, factory farming, and wild animal welfare. Here's Global Priorities Institute, which perhaps focused most on the long-term and on the theoretical, and on there's a fourth category, which is prioritization. The slide's missing there. It's prioritization and how do we think about value and priorities themselves. And GPI does a lot of work in this, both in the long-termist paradigm and in global prioritization. And here's the sorts of questions that they might ask, these sort of deep questions. Okay, and they set out an agenda here, which I won't have time to cover. You can also have a look at the agenda of sorry, this is hidden here, but the agenda of Open Phil and some other organizations. Okay, so what do we need? How does EA look at research? What do we think we need from research? Well, I would divide it up into maybe three categories. One is defining a moral value and choice framework, working out thorny moral questions, and optimization issues. I hope I'm doing okay on time. Let me put open the chat window so if I can see that. Sorry, I'm having trouble getting the chat window open. Can someone chime in to tell me how I'm doing on time?
You would have 5 minutes, but I've heard from our next speaker that she won't be able to give her presentation at the scheduled time. So feel free to take a little longer if you want.
I'll take a little bit longer, but not too much longer. One thing is, the defining a moral, research can help us define a moral value and choice framework, and think about how to do optimization, as in whatever, effective altruist, efficient and rational altruist. Second part of the agenda is, how do we measure the things of value and what policies will work to achieve value? Don't worry, I'll give you some specifics here. The third, which is maybe my own agenda and maybe not so much, but still part of the research agenda for the movement, is how to convince people, how to convince governments, message testing, how to get people to care about other people, animals in the future, and to act pro-socially and effectively. So you can see this will arrange a lot of academic disciplines, and now it's telling me that it's true. Okay, that's a bit weird. Somehow I jumped to the beginning of the presentation. Sorry about that. Let me jump over back. Okay. So, so defining a moral framework, what's that about? Well, we might think about, how do we consider what moral weights to give to animals, to people in the future versus today, to people who may or may not come into being? That's population ethics. And what about moral uncertainty? What if we're uncertain about making moral choices? How should we weigh different systems? How much should we be skeptical of our own beliefs, and trying to come up with formal ways of dealing with that? And here's some things from the GPI agenda. I'll just read one of them. Should one have the same levels of epistemic modesty about unusual moral views, about unusual empirical views? And here's one that's a little bit more economic-y. When should we prioritize saving for future generations? Okay, to what extent should we risk averse, whatever that means, about doing good? Risk averse in the impact we'll have? Okay, so the second category is empirical measurement informing production function for goods. So a large part of this aligns with development economics. But we can divide this up more. There's also, what has value and moral worth? Do animals have sentience in the way that's important for the thing we should care about? That's an empirical exercise. How do we measure value? How do we measure, how do we come up with measures of how well off people are? How, and this gets back at the previous talk, how should we, if we're trying to do good, how should we target that? Okay, so here's some questions from different syllabi. Should we loosen migration restrictions to increase global welfare? From Happier Lives Institute, what is the social welfare benefits, I hope I'm remembering the acronym here, of different highly effective interventions, or we think might be highly effective interventions, including psychotherapy, cataract surgery for blindness, the famous deworming tablets, and of course, bed nets is a go-to case. And then here's the thing that's more my agenda, how to get people to care about others and be effective in doing so. And I try to identify and find evidence for biases and the way that these biases might be overcome, categorizing them and finding evidence for specific biases, running specific field trials and trying to generalize about things that might be barriers to effectiveness, or to considering effectiveness. Okay. Oh, here we are. Here's Open Phil, which is one of the largest funders. Now, not only do they fund research, but your research, if you pitch it, if you communicate with them, might be able to impact the huge amount of funding that they give every year, in addition to the funding I mentioned that could be seen as targeted directly for research. And they actually say, here are the technical and philosophical questions that might affect our grant making. So they're reaching out to academics and saying, here are the things that will affect, millions and billions of dollars. And some of them are abstract issues, some of them are empirical issues. Okay, so now this is, I believe, my second to last section. How does research in effective altruism differ from research in academia, from my own experience? So we probably agree that in research grants, publications, students placed in jobs, and awards are valued. And there's a lot of valuation on novelty, on showing your analytic strength, and yes, evidence, but not necessarily on the second or third paper that confirms the evidence. Of course, the open science and robust science movement is trying to change that. What about at organizations like the Rethink Priorities? Well, we prioritize impact on funds allocated. How much do we influence decision makers, hopefully in the right way? Publication and grants, yes, we are encouraged to publish to some extent, but as a means to an end. And we have a discussion about traditional publication, and I even think we should think about reframing the rules and come up with other ways that we can get feedback and evaluation of our publications and sort of accreditation, a sense of filtering and what's of value that goes outside the traditional journal system. I have a shared doc on that I might mention later. Okay, so we actually try to operationalize which research to prioritize and the cost effectiveness of our input. This is not actual projects, but this is, you can see the Guesstimate tool we use. This is a kind of a first stab at this new framework, but we actually try to get at the impact per dollar spent across these different projects, some in animal welfare, some in movement building, some in long-termist research, some in near-termist research. I'm probably missing some important categories right there. So we basically have, what we say is how much money could we be influencing, and then to what percentage do we think we are influencing that the value of that of the grants made. And then we come up with this money metric measure of the improvement we think we might be having, but then with these wide error bounds, because this is a probabilistic Bayesian tool. So we multiply these things together in a Bayesian probabilistic sense to come up with this overall distribution of distributions. It's a project we're working on, but we're trying to do it in a transparent way, measuring our uncertainty or taking in the uncertainties we have. So yeah, I mentioned this idea I have for more productive system of peer feedback, which I think that EA can lead the way on in these organizations because we have a different value system and we're not so tied to traditional institutions. So I propose this evaluated project repo, which I'll share the link to help escape the journal publication collective action problem. Okay, final thing, how can you get involved? I'm presuming here that you're an academic researcher or a researcher of some sort or a student who's in this area. Future of Humanity Institute offers many options to join or to ally with the Future of Humanities Institute for students and researchers. My organization is hiring in global health and development, as well as some more positions coming soon. Long-termism, meta, and movement building. We value people with PhDs or research experience who are able to and really do care deeply about impact. And GPI has a lot of options. So you can get involved, contact EA organizations, present your work, help build open content, encourage your students, giving ideas to engage with this effective thesis project, which I think is super interesting. Why or why not, final point, why or why not should you want to work in an EA org like Rethink Priorities? If you care about impact and social good, research outcomes, implications, and applications, having an impact. If you like a rigorous analytical framework, so you have to both be rigorous, but anchored and connected to the practical. If you like interdisciplinary, I'm often asked to comment on things having to do with animal welfare, to bring some corner of expertise to that. And I think it's interdisciplinary in the right way. I think it's, well, that's a little bit hard to, you'll know it when you see it. It's incredibly positive and supportive, and there's very little competitiveness from what I'm seeing. And yeah, very high achieving colleagues. Why not? Why should you stay in academia? Well, if you want to focus on deeply theoretical pure research with a completely independent research agenda, even within these organizations, you can have some independence, but for complete independence, maybe stick with academia. Some parts of academia, you can earn a lot of money, not all, but some parts. And the salaries are decent at EA organizations, but, for obvious reasons, not, or maybe non-obvious reasons, not typically in the, high earning. And the job security is pretty good, seems to be pretty good in that the path to the future is good, but I gave up a secure permanent post at a UK university, whatever that means. That's not what you can get at Rethink. or at an organization like Rethink. But you know, some things you might think that it wouldn't offer. Well, actually, it might offer in some ways. There might be a lot of teaching opportunities, opportunities to build teaching materials, to give seminars to people at young people who are students. I'm hoping to build that out a bit and sort of move some of the teaching and learning, and particularly research project supervision, away from universities into independent organizations that care about outcomes and research deeply. If you want to publish and present, maybe that's a conversation we're having. Prestige, maybe. What fields? Economics, philosophy, psychology, and behavioral science. And I think we're really, EA and Global Priorities brings to life philosophy in a way that, you know, you might have seemed an arcane field before. It's now being directly used to inform large amounts of charitable, you know, philanthropic money. Math, stats, computer science, political science, biology, and neuroscience. We recently hired an entomologist, even other sciences. Okay, so yeah, so that's the general pitch. This was a very much a pitch-y presentation, so I apologize for that. And I think I've gone over time a bit, so I will stop now. Thank you very much. And I'll move to the chat window if I can. If that makes sense. What makes sense now?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. It was super interesting, especially to hear your path and the ways that you've kind of developed the knowledge of the field as it is right now. I think, I mean, like I said, the next presenter that we had planned is going to be unable to give the presentation right now. Hopefully for those who are here and maybe we're really interested in that, maybe we can get a recording of that and post it over the next few days if Dr. Werner is feeling well enough to do so. But for now, we could just have some question and answer period if people are up for that.
Great, and I'm trying to turn on the chat, so hopefully I'll have that open in a moment. Show chat, there it is. So I'm just going through the chat now, but feel free for anyone to come on.
Yeah, or people are also welcome to raise their hands and we can do it verbally.
There are some questions in the document I can see.
Oh, that's right, the doc. I'm being silly. I'm sorry. Let's pop open the document. That's where I was supposed to go. I forgot. Normally I've got multiple screens going, but all my sort of setups in England right now. I'm sitting on my porch in Munson, Massachusetts, if anyone can see. It's a nice view around here.
Yeah, so it looks like people would appreciate sharing some of the grant resources. I think you said you would be willing to post your slides, is that right?
Definitely. I will be posting my slides as an HTML with links. Short of leaving academia, how can academics optimize their impact despite academia's limitations? That's such a big question that I don't feel comfortable, you know, spinning on it right now, but some of the resources that I will provide will get at that. Okay, and what that economics tend to do, academics tend to do is of low impact and should be reconsidered. Let me give a little bit of a take on that just to liven up. I mean, there are numerous ways that you can engage and get funding from some of the organizations that I mentioned. Future of Humanity Institute, for instance, is a big one. Rethink Priorities does work with academics, let's say on a part-time basis and on specific projects. The largest funder is Open Philanthropy. They don't take unsolicited grants, but there's a net, you know, it's sort of a matter of getting in the network and going to conferences and having conversations with people. Global Priorities Institute at Oxford also hosts academics in different ways. I think you should also offer to present your work or engage in presenting your work perhaps at GPI. I presented at a GPI seminar. Perhaps post on what seems to be the hub for effective altruism discussion is the EA forum. And it's a surprisingly high level, high analytical, technical, and rigorous level in many cases place. So I would say post or post there or link post there could be a good way. Optimizing your impact despite academia's limitations. I mean, one thing that I see as a limitation, which I've talked, sort of blathered on a lot about or complained a lot about, is the way that a journal publication is seen as an end point. And sort of once I get something published in a journal, I shouldn't care about it anymore because I've earned my points. And I'm trying to find ways that we can go beyond that. And again, I think I'll share some links if I haven't done already to the Google Doc that talks about that. And the idea is that you should be able to build a project that's constantly growing. Maybe it's hosted on a web page that maybe people can give feedback, and then get that evaluated and given credibility, or maybe get a paper that is tied to that, given credibility, but then linked to that in a way that it's a a resource that people can access, particularly the resource that people will find valuable in the sort of spaces that I was talking about. I would say, stating, maybe stating, looking through some of those paradigms that, or some of those, let's say the open fill list of research topics that I mentioned, looking through those, see how your research relates to those, and try to engage directly, either with open fill or indirectly with them via perhaps the EA forum, which like I said, the EA forum is something that everyone reads. I don't know, I'll probably come up with a bunch of other suggestions, which I'll try to feedback here in the document. And in terms of what do academics tend to do that is low impact and reconsidered, I mean, that's a tough one, because a lot of things that academics do, we think might have a long-term impact, but we don't know. So it's hard to know whether it's really connecting to the long-term impact. But I'd say as a guidepost, if you're publishing it or working on it because you think it's going to have a, quote, good publication outcome, and you don't believe in it yourself, then probably it's low impact, and probably it should be reconsidered. I think another thing is you can pivot your research to, even in a particular area, towards, so if you're doing research on mental health, if you're focusing on mental health, I'm just making this up, this might not be wrong in particular, this might not be correct in particular. If you're focusing on mental health in a small developed country, it might be that expanding your focus to mental health in larger populations that are underserved. Okay, but what I should say here is that the paradigm for effective altruism and global priorities is importance, neglectedness, and tractability. So think about in your research, is this important? Does this have potential to make a big difference? Or is the problem I'm addressing a large problem that will affect many people or many animals or many individuals? Neglectedness. Is it a problem that is being funded and researched to a large extent? And I could think about the systematic reasons why that might be. For instance, the National Institute of Health in the US is a large country with a lot of income, large money. So cancer research is a huge problem in developing worlds. It might be heavily funded. And in fact, it's also a problem that receives a lot of sympathy and might be heavily funded. So it's probably not a neglected problem. So think about neglectedness. And the third is tractability, which is hard to know, but does the research I'm doing or what might be a result of the research, indirect or through working with others, might this have the potential to actually make some headway on the problem? Is this a problem that's actually solvable in some way? Do we see evidence or suggestions that, or perhaps past evidence that these things were solvable? Okay, and one more thing I would say is that I would emphasize pursuing research topics that maybe others already have pursued. So not just focusing on novelty, but focusing on, okay, did they get the right answer? Or did they, is there enough evidence here? Let's look at evidence. I think we've gotten a lot of value at Rethink Priorities, or at least people have said that there's been a lot of value from what they call shallow reviews of the literature, which could perhaps, so looking at what's been done and taking a overarching perspective on it, and perhaps leading to formal meta-analyses. Okay, I've gone enough talking on that, so I guess that's my answer for now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like one could kind of learn the logic of cause prioritization and just apply that to granting opportunities that are familiar within their academic field as well. Like not even necessarily trying to go to an EA organization, but just understanding within your academic realm, just prioritizing according to that.
Right, no, exactly. I think a lot of the research academics do is extremely valuable if it's communicated well. And this is now a new audience to communicate your research to, because previously we were talking to, I don't know, other academics, students, governments, maybe businesses, but now there's this additional audience, which is these people who are trying to do good in the world in a principled, analytical way. And I hope I can help be a conduit. And it's not only, they're not only interested in the sort of empirical research into, in particular, let's say interventions in income transfers or things like that. They're also interested in deeply analytical research because it's so relevant to the conversation of should we be, if we have money and other resources to give, should we, let's say, be prioritizing alleviating suffering now, or prioritizing avoiding what's called existential risk? Well, there's some deep questions that come into that philosophers and people in many disciplines in academia look at.
For everyone who's also interested in the research priorities discussion, there we will be using the importance, attractability, neglectedness framework for prioritizing academic research questions. So you can use what you just learned from David and bring that to this discussion.
That's terrific. That's terrific. And I'm looking at the comments, and there's some great comments here that I will try to get back to. And I may have made some mistakes, in terms of describing things like S-risk. I hope the messages in the comments are shared so that I don't lose them. Let me save them right now. Save chat, wherever it saves. It's been saved. Although it is supposed to be in the Google Sheet, but yeah, there's also some great stuff here. I won't read the direct message questions, but I'll get back to those. Yeah, marketing definitely is a lot of what I do is definitely, or what I'm talking about is definitely adjacent to marketing. Can you get involved part-time in your organization, Rethink Priorities? Yes, you can do so either as a volunteer or we hire people on a part-time basis. And many others do. Opportunities for education research, nothing comes up right now, but I can certainly, to mind right now, but I can certainly imagine a few ways in which this could be important, both in researching education as a candidate cause issue for alleviating poverty and suffering, and for considering long-term futures and considering better political systems. That's another issue: better voting, better political systems, better media, that truth comes out. Like the process of building a startup company when research reached a certain state of development in academia, what would be the similar route for research development to be applied to implement the research from EA? I mean, there are one organization I meant to mention in the presentation, I'll put in the fifth one, is called it's something like Charity Incubator. I'm forgetting what it's called right now. And they actually fund promising new innovations in the charity goods sector, one of which is the lead elimination project you may have heard of. Should there be an organization for development applied to implement the research from EA? I mean, I think that there's organizations that do that. I didn't speak too much about them, but I know that they're out there. I was focusing on the ones doing the research. Academics create apps that can be shared as a tool, definitely, but it's hard to quote, I don't know, monetize or publicationalize that. But yes, that's something that's highly valued. Apps, coding, or tools in sort of inputs to research and to the dissemination of research. I'm not sure about RP. Sorry, maybe I shouldn't be showing the direct message, private messages. Apologies. But I have a part-time affiliation at GPI. Yeah, Julian said that. They have several routes to being involved. That's great. And I would say I would contrast GPI a little bit from Rethink Priorities. GPI takes, I think, a much more theoretical and analytical view, and is like if I was a micro, but they also are interested in empirical work. And also another project that maybe Julian's involved in and others is the idea of forecasting, the idea of how much can we predict about in the future, about interventions, about the economy. But in general, they tend to be more focused on the deep analytical issues, whereas Rethink Priority is maybe a bit more empirically focused. Traditionally, it's been more animal focused, but we're also starting a quote near-termist and group, and we do a lot of long-termist stuff. Does the app development also funded by EA? Something to think about. I'm really interested in that, but I don't have the brain space to say something about that now. You can add comments to the document. Okay. Emotional impact of charitable aspects of charitable giving. I'm super interested in Michal's presentation, or sorry, Michal. Yeah, charity entrepreneurship. That's what I meant to say. EA Startup Studio, great. And yeah, and I think that some of the incubators also have a sort of social good component. I know, for instance, that my friends at Momentum were involved with this. All right, I feel like I'm giving a weird ramble here, so maybe someone else wants to talk, and I'll mute myself.
Yeah, we can leave it open for anyone else who wants to ask a question now. And otherwise, yeah, just give it a minute if anyone raised their hand.
Hi,
So,
can you hear me?
Oriana? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks. So thanks for the great talk. It was really interesting. I thought we talk about a lot of different fields, which I think is also the power of this conference, with people coming from academia and outside of academia. And it seems like the speaker has a great insight on all those different environments. And I was wondering if there will be a specific network of people who are all interested outside of Leeds, who are all interested in this effective altruism that you will recommend to join or to check out, or certain skills. We talk about maybe entrepreneurship to build that you will recommend for us to follow.
So yeah, I would say, am I muted or unmuted at the moment? Can you hear me?
Unmuted.
Excellent. So yeah, I would say if you look up effective altruism, and I don't have enough screens to show you right now, but you'll find so many links. So the EA forum is one. The Center for Effective Altruism is a valuable place that tries to coordinate these things. So yeah, GPI is a good place to go. Oh, sorry, 80,000 Hours, actually. They're a huge player in this space. They have a great podcast and a thing to say to help you figure out how to do the most good in your career. And they have some particular takes. I don't agree with all of them necessarily, but they're really well thought out and well considered. So they have takes on, like, should you go to graduate school or not? What they have job listings for what careers are most or do we think will be most effective or most likely to have an impact, and they flag those jobs. I would say, there might also be, if you're thinking of, I'm not sure what's this, just to take you for an example, what's the state of your career, if you mind sharing, or the state of your, point in academia or career?
So at the moment, I'm finishing my PhD, and I'm thinking maybe I'd like to continue because it's the default option in academia, but I'm also really thinking of going outside of academia. And I'm thinking, that's also what I'm here, is to network and try to see people from different fields.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, I think, what field are you in, out of curiosity? What are you doing your PhD?
Yeah, sorry, I passed from mute to unmute. So I started as biologist, and I did neurobiology, and now I'm doing my PhD in between fields. I'm doing between psychology, neuroscience, economy, and philosophy. try to work on introspection, on moral decisions.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like your background is ideal for a lot of different EA organizations and global priorities organizations as far as I can see. I would say, look at some of the discussion at GPI, on the EA forum, at the Global Priorities Institute, some of the things that I'll put up as links on OpenPhil and on some of the animal welfare organizations, if that's something you're interested in. With your biology background, just maybe think about that. Some of the animal organizations, I'm forgetting the best names right now, and look at what are their priorities, what are they interested in, what are they doing research on, and connect to them. And maybe I'm saying what's obvious right now, but try to explain your research to them, and then they'll probably have some suggestions for how, or with us also at Rethink Priorities, they will have some suggestions for, okay, how can your research inform some of our projects? How might you be able to explain your research in a way that people interested in effective altruism and global priorities will find it fascinating? What are some job opportunities? What are some areas of research we might be interested in? What are some, potentially some grant opportunities? Because I think there is funding out there, particularly from OpenPhil, for grants for a lot of the things